Perfect. It's now live. Okay. Um, so our presentation is about what is ethnic studies, and our agenda for today is um, what is ethnic studies. We're going to go over that. We're going to give some background on it. We're going to do the importance of ethnic studies. We're going to have a Kahoot in the middle, and then we're going to listen to stories and interviews. We'll have a Q&A time, and then we'll have at the end a gift card and Rethinking Ethnic Studies book winners revealed. So that'll be fun. Okay, to start off, for what is ethnic studies, it's the study of race and ethnicity understood through the experiences and perspectives of the underrepresented groups within and beyond the United States. And it helps all students discover their own identities and provide insights into their own heritage, as well as learning about others in our increasingly racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse society. Ethnic studies explores the oppression and resistance of marginalized groups and engages students to become critical thinkers of who are able to identify oppression and take action to achieve justice. So we're gonna have a quick poll on if your school has ethnic studies courses, because it tends to be where like a lot of schools lack that.
Sorry, I think something happened, but we are relaunching the poll again. And we'll wait a little couple minutes until everyone has finished.
I think it ended again, Elizabeth.
Okay, we're just waiting on 2 more people. All right, I'll go ahead and in the poll and share the results. So it looks like about majority of people are not sure whether they have an ethnic study course or they don't have an ethnic studies course. So we'll dive deeper into like the importance of ethnic studies and why it matters. All right, so first, to understand the need of ethnic study courses, we must understand the history of how America was built and the systems within the country. With that being said, we'll dive into the history and background of ethnic studies. So, the idea of civilizing quote unquote savage Black and brown bodies traces back to the colonization of the Americas. For centuries, ethnic groups such as Native Americans, Africans, Latinx, and Chinese people have been brutally exploited and forced to assimilate to Eurocentric forms of living, learning, and communicating. And although slavery was outlawed and discriminatory legal admission restrictions were overturned after many educational court cases, a post slavery society still continued to create barriers in education for ethnic minorities. These barriers included discriminatory practices such as racial segregation and ethnic sorting courses not being created and taught in American higher education and in secondary schools. In fact, the first ethnic studies department was established in 1969 at San Francisco State after the longest student strike in American higher education history. The organization who led the student strike, the Third World Liberation Front, felt that, quote, education from kindergarten through college under the authority of the white community failed to focus on subject matter that was germane to the life experiences of the people in the minority community, unquote. So guys, it's important to know that these ethnic students were fighting for an ethnic studies department in the 60s, and they still are fighting for them in schools today. And then this is a quote from Richard Alki. He is a former spokesperson for the Asian American Political Alliance at the UC Berkeley during the Berkeley strike in 1969. He said, quote, "That's what we wanted, education that will address the needs of our communities, one that will end the exploitation and the oppression that existed and still exists in communities of color here in the United States." And then, so next we'll talk about the race perspectives of Indigenous people in history and exactly how does whitewash history may have appeared in your education. So first, from the American history textbooks, the narrative surrounding Indigenous people often revolve around Indigenous people being savages and exotic. The American history textbook published in 1844 by Emma Willard and the 1879 edition of the McGuffey Readers calmly describes a story about Indigenous people in the United States negatively and deceitfully, while glamorizing white historian figures such as Christopher Columbus. In the US history textbook of 1844, the word savage is used multiple times to describe the indigenous tribe. And in this case, the word savage is used accordingly to the online etymology dictionary, which is fierce, ferocious, wild, undomesticated, untamed. And this painting of indigenous people as animal-like, exotic, and untamable creates a deceitful narrative of the indigenous people, falsely illustrating them as villains in their own land and erasing their perspectives on the European intruders. In the McGuffey's reader excerpts, the writers describe Christopher Columbus as a great man who had great values of colonizing and civilizing the natives. And instead of examining and criticizing his actions for wanting to colonize a community, the writers of the McGuffey's reader proceed to construct a negative and obscure narrative about the indigenous people. This one-sided story of Christopher Columbus continues to be taught all around the country, where Christopher Columbus Day is celebrated, along with a song which quotes, "But Christopher was brave, he was bright." This act of glamorizing white figures in history further promotes biases and erases the historical lenses of non-Eurocentric views. And then another example of this is Pocahontas' story, and we see it portrayed throughout in films such as the Walt Disney movie, which was released in 1995. Um, in fact, numerous indigenous people do not resonate with the portrayal of her ancestors and community in the film. For example, her sexual appearance and long flowing hair does not resemble much of indigenous culture. Also, in one scene during the song Savages in Pocahontas, the indigenous people are seen holding spears and preparing to fight the European settlers. However, this was portrayed wrong because fighting and conflict went against indigenous philosophy that instead revolved around peace, integrity, coalition. Although there was resistance in fighting against the European settlers, the story told in the movie Pocahontas continues to prove the Eurocentric bias and view of indigenous people that villainizes them were only trying to protect their land and people. Next slide, please. Okay. And then, as we heard on the previous slide about whitewash history told mainly in textbooks with little appreciation to racial minorities in America, this is another example of the same little appreciation to Black African Americans and Black people as well. This specific incident was in 2015, where the American high school textbook quoted the Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. And in fact, mentoring the Black enslaved people who were taken out of their home as workers is a wrong use of language. It perceives to people that they came to America voluntarily, when in fact, they didn't have much of a choice. And then not to mention that millions of slaves died during the slave trade was barely talked about in history classes. And when these topics are taught in class, they focus on oppression of these racial groups rather than resistance and strength. And this often leaves students feeling powerless. And ultimately, this demonstrates how American textbooks interpret and deal with race and slavery.
Yeah, so let's have some room for discussion here. Has anyone experienced learning whitewashed history in their own history classes? And also, what was one main takeaway that you guys had from these slides so far? And you can also feel free to use the chat or to speak. I can also share first about whitewashed history. In my freshman year, high school, I um, I was taking a world history class, but the whole uh, concepts of everything what I was learning was Eurocentric, and we also mostly focused on Europe. So yeah, if anyone else has anything to share, feel free to speak.
I had a similar experience with Angela, whereas in my freshman year of history, we were taking a class that was called World History, but we really only learned about Europe and maybe a little bit about like ancient civilizations in South America. But I think a lot of times our classes are framed as being really like inclusive of all history, but we really just learn about like, Europe.
During one of my classes for US history, we learned more about like the white settlers and all of their views instead of the other people who also like walked around the land of like North America and everything. And a lot of our documents that we read, like either about like other white people or any situation or more so people of color, it was always just from a white person and never a broader perspective of others. With for the information you guys been presenting, I have never thought about it so deeply about these certain things, so I am enjoying that.
I just wanted to like agree with Sylvia. Like in a lot of my like U.S. history classes, we just learn about like the white people that like made America instead of like what had actually like happened, where like America's built on slavery and racism and like a bunch of like people of color being forced to, help build America. But we don't learn about that. We learn more about like the people that like voluntarily tried to make this country what it is.
I agree with what everyone has been saying. And this past year, I took US history. And one of the things that I noticed was that, we don't really talk a lot about, or the way it's framed is that white people, when they colonized the US, first of all, it erases indigenous people from the narrative. And then it also like glorifies slavery in some ways, where it doesn't actually address it and talk about all of the horrible things and atrocities that were committed.
Okay. Thank you for that, Kaya. I just want to say what Esther said in the chat. She said, in my own experience, it was pretty Eurocentric, and anytime any other ethnic cultures were mentioned, there was actually a lot of stereotypes in the textbooks. I think a lot of people walked away with the wrong impression after this class.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a lot of different, just a lot of misinformation and also one-sided stories in textbooks as well, where I think it's difficult for students to grasp everything about it and also have like a one-sided perspective of everything as well. If anyone wants to share anything more in the chat, you guys feel free to. And anytime you guys want, we're going to be moving on to the next slide now.
All right. Thank you for sharing, guys. So why does it matter? Why is ethnic study important? Like all of you guys mentioned, the stereotypes and the Eurocentric that history that teach us in our class is centered around. Ethnic study is important because most of the time they only talk about the triumphs and the winners and the more powerful. Only they get to tell their stories, not the minorities, not the oppressed. You know, oftentimes you don't really hear that side of this history, but we hear more often the triumphs and the more powerful and the winners. And it's important to acknowledge unethical events. You know, ethnic study helps students understand the importance of diverse history, experience, knowledge of specific racial and ethnic groups are left out of traditional curriculums. It helps students feel a sense of purpose and understanding, identity, power, history, and resistance. It also helps students understand the impacts of American history and be well educated on the ideas of a post-racial society today. It also creates an educated community that acknowledge unethical events and acknowledge ethnic histories. It creates a confidence within the community and creates motivation to create change for a more just society. Acknowledging different backgrounds, hardships, and unethical events is critical. You know, it's critical for students. It allows them to think critically, identify oppressions, to act and achieve justice for becoming more educated and included.
Okay. Here's a quote from Cesar Chavez, who was an American civil rights activist and labor leader. When social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot educate a person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate a person who feels pride, and you cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. And this is a quote that shows a lot about ethnic studies and its effects. As we learn more about our own and other groups' experiences and how they have been oppressed and resisted through everything, we can also feel empowered to come together and create a change. Many issues that people fight for every day and their solutions are tied into ethnic studies because of this education of marginalized groups and others, and understanding how the systems and the experiences can affect them, and also having that ignites a part inside of us to also fight. And as people feel included and seen in schools, they feel purpose and inspired to also rise up, which is also what we see in this quote here. Next, here's just one of the examples for the need for ethnic studies in schools in St. Paul. If we look at this graph, we can see that only 21% of St. Paul Public Schools' students are white, which shows it has a very large number of BIPOC students. Ethnic studies is important, and we can notice that looking at SPPS's diverse student population, it is important for the students to learn about like empowering their cultural identity and also how to just become critical thinkers in combating and identifying oppression in order to achieve justice, along with just raising awareness amongst white students, which may entail just reducing biases and then also becoming educated. Again, students need to hear the untold stories of their own diverse groups, and these are usually left out in history curriculums. As students feel like they're included in school, they're also more understanding and engaged in wanting to be there, which is why we can also notice at San Francisco State University, ethnic studies majors graduated at a rate about 20% higher than on non-ethnic studies majors as well.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. So here's a quote from Amy Tsuyoshi, the Dean of the Ethnic Studies College at San Francisco State University, and it says, to think of yourself as part of America's history, the kind of contributions people have made, and also to think of the struggles. I think it really allows people to feel empowered that they're an important group of folks. And I feel like ethnic study, it really helps bring people together in a sense that they're not they're not white, but they like play a lot of important roles in the community that's not necessarily seen, or that's not necessarily seen in schools or in society. Okay, so now we are going to be playing a little Kahoot game. So I want everybody to try to play. If you can't play, you can follow along on the Zoom screen here, but we're just gonna play a Kahoot game about ethnic studies.
We'll be starting in about 30 more seconds. Let me know if you guys need more time. All right, we're going to be starting now. If you haven't been able to join, you can also follow along with the screen and play.
So what is ethnic studies? The first question. 1, the study of how the human brain works in different cultural environments. 2, the study of ethnic groups that have not been represented in US history. Or 3rd, the study of human development in history.
All right, good job, everyone. Mostly everyone got that right. The study of ethnic studies, ethnic groups that have not been represented in US history. We can see Sylvia's in the lead right now. Good job.
So why take ethnic studies? 1, it helps foster cross-cultural understanding. 2, it helps you appreciate the differences around you. 3, it helps break down white supremacy. Or 4, it helps you value your own cultural identity. And yeah, you all got it correct, so good job. What do you learn in ethnic studies? The Emancipation Proclamation, the history of the human race and their identity, or the untold history, culture, issues, and experiences of ethnic groups? Good job, everybody.
Good job, Miss A, you're in the lead.
Thank you. So taking ethnic studies can help you ... gain knowledge of a broad range of Ethnic groups gain insight into a greater understanding of our diverse world, develop skills in critical thinking to combat and identify oppression, or to win a football game. Oh, great job. Everyone got it right. And Muse is in the lead, but Karina has an answer streak of 4. Good job. So true or false? History classes sometimes cover oppression more than resistance. This one may be a little tricky, so it's okay if you don't get it.
Good job, everyone. Yeah, history classes do cover oppression more than resistance a lot of the time, which is why ethnic studies are important to just realize and embrace identity as well. Muse is still in the lead. Good job, Muse.
So true or false? Double points. Ethnic studies have a positive impact on academic engagement, better test scores, and improved graduation rates. Wow, almost everyone got that right, but good job. Okay, we have a new we have a new leader. Jermone, good job. Answer streak of 6. So, Carly is Native American and wants to connect with her culture more. Will taking an ethnic study class help? Maybe depending on what type of ethnic study course being offered. Yes, because it teaches her the history of her culture, or no, because it will require loads of brain work. Yay, you guys all got it correct. Good job. So true or false, all schools have ethnic studies. Whoa, you guys are impressive. Cameron is back with answer streak of 3. Good job. And Ramon is still in the lead. So some examples of ethnic studies are ... Asian American studies, African American studies, Native American / Indigenous people studies, or Latinx studies. And you all got it correct. Good job. Elizabeth has a streak of 9 correct answers in a row. Good job. And Ramon is still in first place. Good job. So last question, overall ethnic studies overall should be offered in every school, empowers students to love themselves and their communities, help represent diverse perspectives of reality in a globalized world, or teaches us about cultures that were not represented in US history. Okay, very, very nice job. So third place goes to Brent and Maya. Congratulations. Second place, Lucy. And first place, Sorry, good job. And the runners-up are Esther and Natalie. Okay, so thank you guys for participating in the Kahoot. Now I will leave it off to Lisa.
Well, I hope you guys had fun playing the Kahoot. So next, we have a TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Adichie. She is a Nigerian writer and storyteller. A quote that she says in the TED Talk is, "The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story." I encourage you all to watch it, and the link will be in the chat along in the slideshow, which we will send at the end of our workshop.
Okay, next we'll be watching parts of Kaukulia's TED Talk called The Power in Sharing Our Stories. Kaukulia Yang is a Hmong American writer and author. I want you guys to keep in mind the importance of sharing our stories to connect our cultures around the world.
Today I want to talk to you about the power of sharing stories. I was born on December 17, 1980. I was born in Ban Vinai refugee camp, Loei, Thailand. By the time I was born, my family had crossed the river, lived in Thailand for a year. We were on 400 acres, less than a square mile in radius. We got food 3 days out of the week. Thailand was practicing a deterrence policy, a way of getting the Hmong and Laos to stay in Laos. But there was a genocide against my people on the other side of the river for having helped the Americans in the secret war in Laos. We had no option, so my family crossed and I was born. My parents say that I was a present in a year when they did not dare dream of gifts. But I was born, and all I knew was hungry dogs and hungry chickens. I couldn't go to school because I could not do this or do this, a test of maturity, and so I spent my days in the arms of those who loved me. My mom and my dad, my grandma, my aunts and my uncles. And what they did opened up my world in a way that would change my life forever. They told me stories. They told me stories about creatures like the tiger, something I couldn't envision. I had no books, no television to play off. So I would say, is it like a chicken? And they would say no. And I would try to envision this creature that they told me about in the stories, a tiger that could walk and talk, a creature that knew how to do magic that people could do, but magic that we couldn't even envision. I learned about a world beyond the 400 acres I was born into. My father used to carry me to the tops of the trees, and I'd ask him what is home. He would tell me a story of Laos, imagine a story in America. And then he would look at me and tell me that one day my little hands and my little feet would walk on the horizons he's never seen. That I was not a child of poverty and war or despair, but that I was hope being born, the captain to a more beautiful future. I believed him. When we came to America, my grandma told me stories. She told me stories of how education was the garden that I cultivated here, and one day we would reap the harvest together. Education was not so easy for me. It was incredibly hard because I was what was called a selective mute. My mom and I were in Kmart one day. My mom was looking for light bulbs, but she didn't have the one word for light bulb, so she said to the clerk she was looking for the thing that made the world shiny. I could see the clerk doing this, and then she walked away and she didn't come back. My mother, who was far younger than I am today, and I thought the most beautiful woman in the world, definitely the most courageous, she stood there for a long time and then she started looking at her feet. And I decided in my heart, in the heart of a little girl, that if the world we lived in did not need to hear my mom and my dad, then surely they did not need to hear me either. Because at work, my father's supervisors were telling him things like, B, you're here to talk to the machines, you're not here to talk to us. And so I stopped talking. At first, it was a great rebellion. I go into school and I'd say, I'm not going to talk today, and I didn't talk. But slowly, the silence grew inside of me, and the rust in my throat grew in English. So we got to a point where the teachers would say, Kao Yang, are you here? And every time I whispered here, the rust would come out in my voice, and all the other kids would start looking. Something started dying inside of me. But I was a kid and the words had to go somewhere, and so they went on the page. They went to the form that I loved most, the stories. Every time I wrote something for my teachers, whenever I made a mistake, whenever I was unclear, there'd be a squiggly line and a question mark. The question mark was, what do you mean to say? They give you enough chances and you start getting strong. You start knowing what you're doing on the page. So I write in English the way a native speaker speaks. This is the language of my heart. But English is the bridge I build from here to there each and every day. And it is the bridge that I can, in my brain, I can see, I can construct on the page, on paper. I don't need a key. I have a key to the lock. I don't need to ring a doorbell for you to let me in English. And so I became a writer in the process. I did not know then that one day I would stand in front of people and talk about the stories that make me who I am. I didn't know that one day I would stand proudly in front of a room of child services people and say that my mom and dad worked at night and my sister and I took care of the children during the day. It was the secret that we hid in our home, because we knew that if we went to school and we told our teachers, because I was 12 and my sister was 13, that we took care of children every night when our parents went to their jobs as second and third shift assemblers, that we could get taken away from our parents. We knew that maybe it was illegal. I had no idea that these would be the stories that I would be telling to the world, that I would be exposing these realities that not only my family, but so many other families live. But that's what I do for a living. That's what I do for a life. I tell stories. I had no idea then what the stories would do for me or the world that I lived in. In 2008, I wrote a book called The Late Homecomer, a Hmong family memoir. I didn't expect anyone to come to the launch. It was a snowy April evening, common enough here. I went there thinking that all I had to do was stand up, sit down. Everybody would clap, and then I could sign books and have some appetizers, and the evening was through. But that was not the case. I walked into a room with about 300 people, about the size of this room, actually. Not just men and women, my mother and my father, my aunts and my uncles, but all of these people who had taught me all along the way. So many teachers, so many educators from the St. Paul Public Schools. And I couldn't speak. I got up and I sat down. I got up again and I sat down. And my father, he walked from the back of the room. He walked in a Brooks Brothers jacket that I bought him. The most expensive thing that I was able to buy before my father. A year at Columbia, I had $500 left in fellowship money. You know, because when we were kids in third grade, Doe won the North End Elementary School spelling bee. Doe, my older sister, Doe, who would become the attorney that she said she would be for our family. She won the North End Elementary School spelling bee 2 years after we came to the country. And she got $50. With her $50, she bought her father his first pair of nice shoes at Kmart. Shoes that actually fit, because previous to that, he'd been getting his shoes from the church basements, and they slapped the ground when he walked. So my father was always embarrassed in the hallways of the schools that we attended. And then with his rough machinist hands that cut into metal, the metal had done its wear, my father was always embarrassed to shake hands with her teachers. But Doe bought him shoes that made him walk prouder. And so I always thought in my brain, one day I'm going to buy my father something that's going to be better than $50 shoes from from Kmart. And then I got $500, and the most expensive thing I could do was buy this Brooks Brothers jacket. So the night of my book launch, my father wore it. He sat in the back of the room, but he got up and started walking toward me as I struggled to speak. When my father stood in front of me, he opened his palms. And my hands were shaking, so I put my hands on top of his. And he said, Minai, from hardness you can give birth to softness. I have the soft hands of a writer. My father said to me, words I'll never forget. He says, if Hmong tears can reincarnate, we would rain the world with our sorrow. But because they cannot, they can only green the mountains of Pumbia. If you speak, if you tell our stories, then maybe our lives were not lost for anything. Maybe the winds of humanity will blow. That's the first time I spoke publicly, and I've been doing it ever since. I go into schools and I tell children, classrooms full of, Hmong children, that whenever we point to the moon comes and it slices their ear. It's not imaginary, it's a real cut in the ear. And then I say, does this happen to you guys? And they think about it for a long time, and then slowly they raise their hands. It's happened to them as well. Because when I was young, I used to whisper this to a few of my classmates, and they tell me I was crazy. They tell me that I was lying, How could the moon slice the ear of a child? And I would never have the words to say anything. When I was a child and people would say, where are you from? I used to say Mongolia because it sounded the most like Hmong, because I am Hmong, but not written in the history books of America. I'm Hmong from a war that's undocumented. When we studied about the Vietnam War, it was the Americans in the North Vietnamese army. It was the Viet Cong, Ho Chi Minh Trail. There was nothing about the people like my mom and my dad, women like my aunts and my uncles. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been talking and I've been sharing our stories, the secrets that we've been hiding for so long, the burden that we've carried without understanding on our side. Because all over this country, people ask, where are you from? What are you doing here? I belong to a people, to a mother and a father who cannot explain what we're doing here. So that's what I do. And when my book came out, it was the first time people came up to my mom and my dad, strangers, and they said, welcome to America. They said, we're so happy to have you here. And my mom and dad, 10, 15 years, 20 years after the fact, they stand there and they weep. Every time I speak, if there's a Hmong man or a woman in the background, they come up to me and they say, thank you, Menai. Thank you for telling our stories, the stories that we've been living so long to tell. All of this started at Carl.
All right, does anybody have any comments, thoughts, or questions about Calculia's TED Talks? You can feel free to write in the chat or speak up on it.
Throughout her TED Talk, I was just thinking about how good of a storyteller she is and how it kind of gets you even like emotionally. I think that's very powerful as well. And that's the reason why like we want more people to share their stories as well, and also just hearing more like that.
For me, I think there was
Yeah.
this. Oh, you can go first.
Oh no, it's okay. You can go first.
Well, there was this one quote where the father said to, was it Kaukalia? If Hmong tears were to be like to exist, it would flood the world with our sorrow. I feel like that, like I don't know, like that, like reached something deep inside of me, like like the TED Talk in general was very emotional. Like it got me emotional as well. And yeah, I agree with was it Angela, that she's very good with her stories and how she tells them.
Yeah, she is very extraordinary, and I think the TED Talk that she made, that she spoke, is very phenomenal. And it's so like surprising that she graduated from my high school. And I don't know, never in a million years would I think that uh, a person like her that's not white or American gets to share her story. And the part where they asked her like, where are you from, and she couldn't really explain where she was from because there was no like stories about her culture, and it's just information that they tend to leave out in textbooks. And I feel like that was me when I was young, because it's not as easy as explaining, like if you're in an ethnic group, it's not easy to explain that, oh yeah, I'm Korean or I'm Japanese. You don't even know it yourself because it's not taught in schools. So it's like you're kind of forgetting your own culture while trying to explain to others what you are or where you came from.
Again, if anyone wants to share anything else in the chat, feel free to anytime. We'll be moving on to the next slide now. Thank you for everyone for sharing your thoughts.
Okay, now we are going to dive into personal interviews of Harding High School teachers and students. So for our first interviewer, Cao Zhang, he is a strong advocate for ethnic studies courses and curriculum to be implemented into Minnesota's school standards. So he is a social studies teacher, and in the past, he has taught government and Hmong American studies. For this upcoming school year, Zhang will be teaching human geography, US history, and Asian American studies. So some of his goals for his courses are making the courses more culturally relevant and responsive to students' lived experience, providing a safe space for students of color and encouraging them to have courageous discussions about race and social injustice to help students of color develop critical thinking skills that go beyond the lens of Eurocentrism, and to introduce students to iconic people of color and their achievements in this country, and also to teach woke history rather than whitewashed history. So moving on to the third question, Zhang believes ethnic studies help students learn about their own unique identity and gives them ownership to their narrative of their own Americans' history experience. Without knowing their unique place in America's history books, he believes that students will lose part of their American identity and the stories from before. So for the last question, what Jean would want for his students to take away from his class is to think more critically about people of color issues and people of color's issues, and to humanize people of color's experience through the history they learn. And he also believes it's too often people are taught to humanize white people's experiences through history, while people of color are taught to internalize hate and racism and reciprocation. I'll pass it on to Lisa.
Thank you, Sunny. Okay, moving on to our second interviewee, Abby Munn, who is also a social studies teacher as well. She helps co-lead a student leadership program called D2 at Harding High School, which is short for Dare to Be Real. The program focuses on advocating for racial and social equity. Munn is a big advocate for ethnic studies and wants to create an inclusive space for students of color in schools. For the first question, a little bit about her is, she has taught US history, African American studies, and women's studies in the past. This upcoming school year, Munn will be teaching a new class called Critical Ethnic Studies, along with African American studies. Moving on to the next question, some of her goals for her upcoming classes are to work as a facilitator and allow students to really take reign of the course, provide opportunities for students to explore and dive deep into content that feels relevant for them, allow students to really learn and think critically about topics like identity, systemic oppression, and resistance, while also seeing their own role and learning how to work toward positive change in their own communities. And moving on to the third question, Munn thinks it is important for students to take these courses because it gives an opportunity for students to be highly participated and engaged. Most importantly of all, the course allows students to explore content that feels relevant to their lives here and now, and gives them the tools they need to express themselves and their thoughts, reactions to the things happening in the world around them. And lastly, what Munn would love for her students to take away from the class is to feel confident in their speaking and discourse skills, to know that their voice matters and should be shared. She wants them to have an understanding not only of systemic oppression, but also ideas about how they can work to combat the oppression they see in their lives and communities. A quote from her interview is, "Mostly, I just want students to feel like they're not alone, like their ideas are important and their feelings matter. I want them to walk away with hope for a better world and the confidence to be a part of making that happen." Next slide. Okay. Last but not least, our third interview is with Simonique Sharp, who has recently graduated as class of 2021 from Harding. Ms. Munn from the previous interview acknowledged Simonique as one of the students who was actively engaged and loved participating in class activities in African American Studies. For the first question asked, what was the most memorable thing about the class? Simonique emphasized how good of an experience the class was. What stuck out to her the most was writing a poem about the obstacles and struggles of African descendants and having to perform to the class. Simonique said she felt nervous having to perform her poem to the class. However, she later felt joy to enlighten and educate her classmates. And moving on to the third question, Simonique highly recommends younger students to seek ethnic study courses. To end off our interview section, Simonique would like to relay a message to you all saying, ethnic studies courses can brighten your knowledge about the people of your own from before.
Right. Now we're going to be talking about which schools in Minnesota have ethnic studies courses, and also a quick shout out to our Youth Fellows Outreach Group, who contacted many different districts in Minnesota this summer to help us with this workshop, and also just make it easier for students to figure out what classes their schools might offer. As we can see in this graphic here, there's a key of different ethnic studies classes and the colors that correlate them with like each school. The classes that are offered are African American Studies, Somali Studies, Hmong Studies, Asian American Studies, Chickenx, Latinx Studies, First Nation Studies, Race and Identity Studies, Latinx Studies, Indigenous Studies. We have specific classes for Minneapolis here and have it so that there's also a variety across St. Paul high schools, and then also if there's any other districts or schools that might have them. Also, SPPS and MPS are also making it like a graduation requirement to take ethnic studies classes. And it's going to begin for the class of 2025. Also for race and identity studies here, that's going to be required for 9th graders for MPS. And although many schools are implementing many ethnic studies courses now, the fight still continues for many more schools to get rid of the Eurocentric education system that does not share all of the untold stories about people's identities. And I hope that all the information we've shared so far about ethnic studies has also been helpful towards everyone's understanding about how it just leads towards critical thinking of identity, oppression, and history, and then also sharing stories of resistance. And if your school isn't listed, or you want to see if there are any more classes or possible ES courses for you, or if anyone else might be interested that you know, I encourage you all to look into the schools, or also just contact a staff member if you're also interested. And we will also share this presentation when the workshop's over, so you can all view this information and share it along with anyone else. So yeah. We're going to be having a poll as well right now. The question is going to be, which ethnic studies courses are you interested in taking? And there's also an option for other. You can also type in the chat which one you'd like to take or are interested in. So we have Race and Identity Studies, Ethnic Studies 101, African American Studies, Chickenx, Latinx Studies, Asian American Studies, and Indigenous Studies, and Somali and Hmong Studies. All right, so everyone answered. The largest result was Asian American Studies, and then everything else was kind of just scattered around. It's very nice to see everyone being interested in wanting to take these courses. If you said other, feel free to say which ones you'd like to take as well.
Okay, well, now that we know what schools have what classes and what classes you'd like to take, if your school doesn't provide any type of ethnic studies classes, or you just want more ethnic study classes in your curriculum, then this is how you do it. So gather peers from your school and collectively form a coalition to push for and advocate for ethnic studies in your curriculum. So only like youth is going to change what we want like to see in our curriculum. And like I think it's really important as like youth to show that like we actually do care, and that's like a really good way, like making a coalition of students is like a really cool way to show the support. And you also can show support by helping local organizations that are fighting for ethnic studies. And then again, by showing support for these organizations, it shows schools and districts that students want to learn about ethnic studies and that you want it in your curriculum.
All right, and then here's some organizations and resources that you guys can look at to either help you push for ethnic studies or also just learn more about it. So the first one, so the Youth for Ethnic Studies Coalition created an organizing toolkit that gives a lot of information about what ethnic studies is and its history, goals, and benefits, and then also just taking action towards it. I'll share it here. So it basically just looks like this, where they have just lots of information about everything and lots of resources for you as well. And then you can also join Youth for Ethnic Studies at this link. I'll send it in the chat. And then you can also follow their Instagram. It's just Youth for Ethnic Studies for their handle right here. And then also, there is also the Minnesota Ethnic Studies Coalition, and their website is also right here, ourschoolsmn.com. So they offer a lot of opportunities to advocate for ethnic studies, and it's made up of a lot of different organizations in Minnesota that you can also join to like support these initiatives. AAOP is also one of them, the first. And then, yeah, the website is ourschoolsmn.com. They also answer some questions here about who they are, what ethnic studies is, and why it's important. And then also just talking about bills and advocating. So yeah.
All right, thank you, Angela. So if you guys have any concern, questions, anything wasn't clear, or if you just want to make a comment, here's the time. All right, if you guys don't have any questions, we can move on.
Yeah, and then feel free to just type any questions that you guys have as well in the chat, or just speak as well. That works.
All right, so here is the website that we created where you can share your story. We encourage you to share your stories. You can share your story, your family stories, but with consent, of course. And this website is also used for discussions, and you can also make comments on this discussion, and you can also introduce yourself, get to know other people.
Yeah, so you can also, I think when you first look at the website, you can make an account through your Google account, and then that's how you can start either making a post about anything of whether it's about your experiences living in America, or just basically anything about how you might want to implement ethnic studies into your schools, or any stories that you have about that. There's also an introduce yourself forum post here, where you can just say your name and your pronouns and any facts about yourself, anything that you want to share. And then, yeah, we'll also be putting our workshop recording up on this website here. And then we also have some resources, and we're going to be having that there along with this data that we put into the slide that you guys saw earlier about schools in Minnesota that have ethnic studies courses. So yeah, also there is a contact form here at the end. You guys can email us if you have any more questions even after the workshop as well. So yeah. Okay, and then now, if anyone doesn't have any more questions, we can also move on to our gift card raffle. Let's see. So, oh yeah, so basically, we're gonna be giving away 5 $25 gift cards, and you guys can also choose from either a store of your choice or a Visa gift card that will be virtual. And then also we will be giving away 2 books called Rethinking Ethnic Studies, which is a book that offers like a lot of different resources for people who might want to be involved with like the movement of bringing ethnic studies into the classroom. So we can get that going now. Oop.
All right, so, oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm gonna be doing the raffle on stream. Making sure I have all these. I think that's everyone.
If you don't see your name, you guys can say something.
Yeah. Okay. So, oh, also, based on availability, you guys can choose either one of the 2 Rethinking Ethnic Studies books or the gift card. So let's start that. Okay, so Tiwa's our first winner. Congratulations. Tiwa, you can say what you might want in the chat or just unmute as well. And I'll also put the options in the chat too. Okay, sounds good. All right, we'll do the next person here. All right, Peter, you can say what you want to.
Oh, I'll pass. I'm just here to support you all. So if you want to respin, you can. But great workshop and presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. Yeah. We'll do a reroll. All right, Henry, you can choose either a gift card or anything. I think we can also contact people after as well. So we'll move on to the next person. Right, congratulations too. You can say what you want in the chat, or you can also unmute as well.
Cool.
Do you want to choose like either like the gift card, or do you want like the book? Sounds good, thank you. Congratulations, Jerome. Again, just write in the chat too of what you might want. Great, thank you.
Don't forget to shuffle, Angela.
Yeah. All right, and then Camille, you can do the same. All right, so that's all of the gift cards, and then our last two winners will be winning the books for Thinking Ethnic Studies. So right, congrats, Cameron. We'll also be emailing you afterwards, so we can just either drop it off or mail it, the book, to you. And our last winner is Justin. And then again, we'll be contacting you afterwards as well, for everyone too, with also the gift cards to get them to you guys. So yeah, congratulations, everyone.
We'll be reaching out via the email that you registered under. So if for some reason that is not a good email to reach you at, please just send to everyone in the chat or private message me on Zoom to let me know what email you would prefer. Otherwise, we'll reach out to the one you provided. Congratulations.
All right, congratulations, guys. So what are some of your key takeaways from this workshop? You guys can answer in the chat or just unmute and say it. Has this workshop inspired you to take courses? How do you think you will be involved in ethnic studies in the future? What was your favorite thing about this workshop? We just want to hear some of you guys comment.
And also, if you guys have anything else you'd like to bring up or ask as well, you can also use this time too. So
You guys can share any thoughts.
I'd say
Did you
my
guys-
favorite, oh, sorry.
No,
Oh,
it's okay. Go ahead.
I'd say my most favorite thing about the workshop was getting to watch the TED Talk. I feel like it is important for us to share our stories and our experiences so we can all like collaborate together or work together so we can um, establish ethnic study courses into our schools because I think it's very important.
I agree. The TED Talk made me emotional. I actually teared up. I'm just maybe too emotional. I don't know. So what did you guys think of the presentation? Any comments?
I think you guys did a really amazing job. It was really informative, and then all the information I learned was really clear. I really liked the interview section because you got to hear like the real life perspectives of other people.
Thank you, Alyssa and Jerome. Jerome put in the chat, he said, I like learning about the history of the erased perspective of marginalized groups. All right, I'll give it 30 more seconds, then we can move on.
For me, also just working on this workshop and also doing more research about ethnic studies really helped me and just learn more and delve deeper into understanding the importance, because I feel like even being in school right now kind of makes me realize I am learning a lot of different things that I don't think has all of the stories that it should have, and also just does encourage me to also want to take more ethnic studies courses as well. So yeah.
I agree. I think it has also inspired me to take more ethnic studies courses, or I will try to look more into them at my school. And I also agree that I thought the video, the TED Talk that we watched was very powerful.
All right. Should we move on? Okay, guys, I just want to say I really encourage you guys to take these classes because it's these type of classes, courses, and educations that will really open your mind to critically think and question your system. Because as most of you guys may know, the system is systematically created not for people of color, but for white people. That's why white privilege exists systematically. And also, if you do take these courses, take them with an open mind and an open mind to learn. Because once you start connecting the dots, seeing the patterns and histories, you will really critically think and then really critically think about the government and system that you're living in right now. I don't know if I'm saying too deep into it, but it is tad deep. It's history. So much of it is told by the triumphs. So we encourage you guys to listen and to learn about ethnic studies, people of color side. So thank you guys for coming here and listening to us and taking the time off your day to come here.